So with that, Mark asked me if I would share on intentional living. And so I've entitled my talk / I'd like for some interaction at some point. But it ended up being more of a talk than a teacher, which would go to what my wife believes my true calling and giftings are, is not a teacher. So I apologize for that, Mark, if I missed the mark. But the title that I've chosen is Intentional Living and the Power of Habits. So a question I have to begin with, if nothing changed in your life over the next 5 years, would that be okay? Stop and think about that for a minute. If nothing changed in your life over the next 5 years, would that be okay? So as we dive into this a little bit more today, hopefully you can think about that question. Mark asked if I would come and share about intentional living, and I was excited to share with you, not because I feel like I have all the answers on the topic, but I also feel like Mark may have set me up for failure a little bit, in that he may have oversold it by thinking that I live this truly intentional life. I still struggle. And I think part of Mark's picture comes from the fact that he views my habits in running as the rest of my life. And so there's a lot of gaps that I still need to fill in. And my family, they have a few different words for this, I believe, that's not intentional. Words that may sound like crazy, stubborn, predictable, or the fact that I run in a groove. I'm constantly reminded by my family that I run in a groove. But hopefully this morning I can challenge or inspire somebody to walk away from here living a life that's more intentional. We want to look at 3 ways to make habits stick because they are one of the most effective tools in leading an intentional life. But first of all, we need to look at what do we mean by intentional living. So let's take a look at that. Intentional living is living life in line with your values to pursue your why. Living life in line with your values to pursue your why. Intentional living is living on purpose, or you have a plan for your life. One of the things that I want to add here is there's a lot of material out there regarding intentional living and living a life on purpose. And it's great. But I think where I'd like for us to make sure that we're different from the world, if you will, is our intentional life needs to also match up with God's plan for your life. And let's not forget that when we think about intentional living. Let's make sure that we're in God's will for this. Intentional living is also not living your life on autopilot. It's not staying in that groove, if you will. It's not feeling like you're stuck in an endless routine. So a question that I have is intentional living important? The second law of thermodynamics states, things left to themselves tend to deteriorate. And I think that's that's life. That's life. C.S. Lewis says, spiritual growth requires an intentional effort. Spiritual stagnation and decline require no effort at all. And I found that so true in my life. When I don't put any effort into it, or when I just kind of coast, there is no such thing as coasting in life. We have to be intentional about it. So where do we start with living an intentional life? And I struggled a little bit with going down this path because I have struggled with this concept because I feel like there's been a lot of buzz around this that's I've grown stale to it at times. But I think you really need to start here. And that's with a personal vision statement. Who do I intend to become? What's the meaning of my life? Who do you want to be identified as? And part of the reason why I struggled a little bit with this is the fact that it's so popular, but I feel like it's overused. But it's necessary. And hopefully by the time we're done with this, you would agree with me. So this is, who do I intend to become? Who do I want to be identified as? And this is a big deal. I also don't think that it's something that we can say, okay, I have arrived now. When I think about our vision statement at Provia, and I'll be using a lot of examples from that, we define it as to be the premier building products manufacturer, okay? That means that there's always going to be somebody pushing us, and we always need to grow and move out ahead. So that's what it means to have a personal vision statement that's defining who we intend to become. What got us here will never get us there. What got you here will never get you there. And Proverbs 29 verse 18 says, people perish from lack of vision. And I think that's so true in our personal lives. We tend to die spiritually when we lack the vision of what we want to become. I love a Chinese proverb that I came across that talks about vision and the difference between a short-sighted vision and a long-term vision. It says, if your vision is for a year, plant wheat. If your vision is for 10 years, plant trees. If your vision is for a lifetime, plant people. Because that's what we're ultimately here for, is to serve one another. So, what does that look like? Mark asked me to share some practical tools, and after digging into this and really studying for this morning, I realized how much work I have to do, but I felt like I wanted to go ahead and share what I have laid out there and how I use it. So I use and I'll get into this a little bit more later on, but I've tried a lot of tools, if you will, to write out a vision, purpose, whatever. My current platform is Notion. I don't know if anybody has heard about Notion. I was introduced to this by Wynn last year, and it just really clicked for me. So I have everything, and you'll see more of this as we go on, but I have everything located here where I can review it daily if I want to. So for me, I use this, and it also includes all my to-do lists. And then every day I open this, and so this is the page that I'll see. Keeps it right in front of me. So that's vision. Next, we need a mission statement. What do I intend to accomplish? What's my purpose? It answers these questions. What do I do? How do I do it? Who do I do it for? And what is the benefit? And what makes me different? The mission statement, along with our values, should drive our day-to-day activities. Again, another example of this is our Provia mission statement. It says to serve by caring for details. It's the serving portion that's impactful. The value of having a mission statement is that it helps us make hard decisions about how to use our resources, our time, our money, our skills, whatever it is. So for us at Provia, when we have a task, the question that we need to ask ourselves, how am I going to serve? How am I going to serve? When we have a clearly defined mission statement, many choices are quickly eliminated. It helps us be proactive instead of reactive because we know which direction we're going to go. And we can think through the consequences of our actions ahead of time. Now, a mission statement may look different for different aspects of your life, so you may need a couple different ones. I'll show you what mine looks like in Notion again next. And some of this is stuff that I've not really shared with anybody. So you guys get a peek into my world and how I think and how I do things. So I have it laid out on the left-hand side, what I call horizons of focus. So it's spiritual, health, family, work, social, hobbies, self-development, and finances. And you can have, they will be different for everyone. But there's several that should be the same for all of us. So you can see there, what I try to do is, okay, what do I want to accomplish in each one of these aspects of my life? And then set some short-term goals and some longer-term goals out of that. And I would also add that don't try to find something that works for you. Don't try to copy what someone else is doing just because you think it looks good or it needs to make sense for you. So if that's Notion, Evernote, Outlook, whatever it is that works for you. Maybe it's a journal. Maybe it's paper and pen. But find something that works for you. One example of what a good mission statement may be for the spiritual aspect may simply be Matthew 28:18-20. All authority in heaven and earth has been given to me. Therefore, go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and the Holy Spirit. It's the go and make disciples. That could be your mission for your spiritual aspect of your life. Next, we want to look at the values statement. What are the principles that guide and constrain how I do that, how I live my life? It's your conviction. Our values form our convictions that guide us in our thoughts, words, and deeds. I think this is where we need to start. This is identifying your personal values and then living your life in alignment with those values. It's about being intentional and not aimless. But to be effective, our values need to apply across all aspects of our life. Work, home, community, church. If they are not aligned in all aspects of your life, this will not be sustainable. So you need to make sure that they're aligned in all aspects of your life. Another thing that I came across that is really challenging, I think it's a trap that we can fall into, is when we don't set our own values, you will end up losing yourself in other people's values. This can lead to a life that looks good on the outside, but leaves you feeling hollow and empty on the inside because you're not following your own set of values. So everybody needs to identify what are your values and where are you going to start. So all of this that we've looked at looks good and sounds good, right? But it does us no good if all we do is simply write it out and never put it into practice and live it out every day. I think this is where a lot of personal and corporate vision statements fall flat. It's because we spend so much energy putting it on paper and making sure that it makes sense, but then we forget to live it out every day. Another part of it is I think we need to review it constantly. Review where are you at. So if you don't have a purpose, a vision, mission, and value statement written out, what are you reviewing against? How are you going back and making sure that you're living your life the way that you want to live it? We should check in occasionally and make sure that we are running according to the values or convictions that we started out with. It's important that we review, update, refine, and just keep working on it regularly. It's not something that we can I believe it's not something that you can just put in place and then coast through life again. So all of this is good because it helps us provide direction, but it can also trick us into trying to do more than we can handle. And that's where the next part of this, I would say the rubber meets the road. The next part of this talk kind of comes into every day. So daily habits or tiny routines that are repeatable are what make big dreams or visions, missions, and values a reality. So anybody want to guess how much of your day is actually spent in just performing habits, if you will? Anybody brave wants to? Yes.
Spend about 12 hours.
What percent of your day? 50%?
Yep.
Huh? 90? It's a range, but stop and think about your day. I've read anything from 40% to 85% of your day is based on the habits that you've developed. So that's why healthy habits are so important to living intentionally. So now I want to look at what a habit is, and then 3 effective ways to make habits stick. So first of all, what's a habit? James Clear defines it as habits are the small decisions you make and actions you perform every day. So it's just the small decisions that you make every day. They're routine. The way you get up in the morning, the way you have your coffee, same spot every morning. I am a creature of habit, probably more than a lot of people. But they're real. Stephen Covey defines it a little bit different. It's the place in the middle where your knowledge, your desire, and your skills all kind of collide, and those are the habits that you form. One of the things that I had to think about when I saw this is, I've often thought, man, I really would like to play a musical instrument, whether it's guitar or piano. I think I could acquire the knowledge it would take to do it. The desire, I kind of have the desire to do that. I want to. The skills, yeah, I think I can get there. But it's that center portion that I really struggle with. Every day, picking up the guitar, sitting at the piano, whatever that is. And so that brings me to a quote that I love, and it's so powerful. If your habits don't reflect your dreams and goals, you can either change your habits or change your dreams and goals. So if your habits don't reflect your dreams and goals, you got to change one of them. And so if your habits don't line up with your vision, your mission, and your values, you have to change something. So an example, and I promise a lot of this won't be running, but since I do enjoy running and I have learned a lot of valuable lessons through that, an example that I have is in 2013, one of my dreams or goals was to run Akron Marathon to qualify for Boston. Now, I had a choice. I could either change my dream and goal and be content with just running Akron, or I can change my habits and get out the door every morning and run hard and train hard so that when I get there, I can achieve that dream and that goal. So what else is a habit? It's the small things done over time is what we become. So it's just the small things that we do every day. And I think sometimes we get caught up in trying to make up for the lack of good habits that we have in our lives. An example of this may be, so as a dad, I don't spend enough time with my sons every day or every week or whatever that looks like. And I think I can make up for it by planning a week-long vacation and, do it all there. Catch up, if you will. But that's not what our children desire. They want that constant, just daily interaction. That's what builds relationships. Can't make up for it, for what you've missed. So I'd also like us to think about our time is kind of the same as money. And for those of you that are familiar with the Dave Ramsey approach to money, if we don't tell our money where to spend it, it'll just find a way of leaving us. How many of you have found that to be true? Right? Okay. Time is the exact same way. Okay. So we get to tell ourselves what we're going to do with that time. But we can never make up for lost time. So another question I have for you is, do we think it's difficult, or do we find it difficult to change habits? Incredibly difficult. When you think of people that have struggled with bad habits in their lives, whether that's drinking, smoking, maybe porn, maybe weight management, and the way they overcome these habits, oftentimes they need a support group around them to change those habits and to come alongside of them and encourage them to develop better, healthier habits. And when I was thinking about this shouldn't that be a place where the church, where we're all encouraging each other to develop healthier spiritual habits? But what it takes oftentimes to do this is we need to be vulnerable with each other and be willing to share what is my spiritual vision like? What are my goals? So that others can come alongside of us and help us develop those healthy habits. So, hopefully I've convinced you that habits are important to living intentional lives. They become our identity. Stop and think about this. And we'll talk a little bit more about this as we look at ways to make habits stick. But habits really are all about they create your identity. Confucius said that the nature of man is always the same. It is their habits that separate them. So, how do we make habits stick? Number one, create identity-based habits. Create identity-based habits. This one is huge. The reason I picked this one here, and also let me say that I've picked 3 ways to make habits stick. There's plenty more. I just chose 3 this morning. The reason I picked this one here is because of how closely it ties to our vision, mission, and purpose, and our values. We get to decide who we want to be, and not what we want to accomplish. We get to decide who we want to be, and not what we want to accomplish. You can't really rely on motivation all the time. So you have to try to figure out, who do I want to be? You have to become the type of person you want to be. And that starts by creating the new identity for yourself. Anyone can convince themselves to run a mile or eat healthy for a week or 2. But if you don't shift the belief behind the behavior, then it becomes hard to stick with long-term changes. Improvements are only temporary until they become a part of who you are. And this is an incredibly hard part of this work. So another thing that I get asked all the time is, at what point does running become fun? People ask me that all the time. But I think it really comes down to when you start to see yourself as a runner and not just the activity that you have to do, the accomplishment that you have to do. Changing our beliefs is a powerful way to change the outcome. So our beliefs determine our identity, and then our identity determines our actions. The key to building lasting habits is focusing on creating that new identity first. And your current behaviors are a result or a reflection of your current identity, of who you think you are. And again, part of the reason why I think it's so hard to stick to new habits is we often try to achieve a performance or appearance-based goal instead of without changing our identity, without changing who we are. When I was thinking about identity and trying to think of somebody that had a habit that identified with that habit in the Bible, and my mind went to Daniel. He had a healthy habit of praying 3 times a day. Didn't matter. Didn't matter what the circumstances were. And he must have been so consistent with that. The people that were against him, they knew that this was one way they could get to Daniel and accomplish what they were trying to do. Good habits are not acquired simply by making good resolves. They're developed in our everyday lives. But it's not the great moments of test and trial that character is built. It's not in those moments. That is only when it is displayed. So think about Daniel in this. He could have decided, you know what, for this next period of time, I'm going to drop this habit and we're not going to pray where everybody can see me. But he chose to stay consistent. That was who he was. A couple other examples of what this may look like. So again, if your goal is to run a marathon, you may start to think of it like this: I'm a runner, therefore I run. That's better than I am training to run a marathon, therefore I have to run. See the difference? Just a slight difference. The have to moves it to something, makes it sound like a chore. And when your behavior is linked to your identity, it drives your behavior. Okay? If your goal is to write a book, you're a writer. Therefore, you write. You don't have to write. Therefore, you get to write. Okay? If your goal is to lose 14 pounds, you're a healthy eater. Therefore, you eat healthy. You don't have to eat healthy. You eat healthy. Or if your goal is to create paintings, you're an artist. Therefore, you spend time painting. We have one of our children loves to spend time painting and drawing, and she's an artist. She creates things that I could only dream of creating. Why? Because she just spends so much time creating things. That's who she is. Matter of fact, for Christmas, she made this tiny little running shoe keychain ornament. I mean, it's like that big. And so I asked her, like, how did you, and it's made out of clay, and she baked it, and it's hard, and painted it, looks great. So I asked her, how did you do that? Well, I just, I made it. I'm like, really? So that's what it takes to get to an identity-based habit. We need to create that. When I was trying to think of who else do I think of when I think of an identity-based habit, I had to think of Mark. Mark, when I think of you as someone who's very generous. You're always giving to something or someone. But it's natural for you. You don't look at it as, I have to give. That's who you are. So you're always willing to give, not just financially, but also of your time. So the big question I want us to ask ourselves this morning is this. When people think of me, what do I want them to think of? When people think of me, what do I want them to think of? And I will say this. There have been times where, like I said, people look at me and they think of me as a runner. I cannot tell you how many times I've met somebody, I don't even know them, and they're like, are you the runner that I see out on 39 all the time? Like, that's who they identify me as. And sometimes that has actually bothered me because at the end of the day, I want to be known more for following God than I am for running. That's who I want to be, truly. So the big question is, when people think of me, what do I want them to think of? Or the bigger question, what do I want my God to think of me? We know He loves us, but what is our identity in Him going to be? Are we going to be like that person that buried the talent that we've been given, or are we going to use it to make more and create the true identity that God has created us for? Next, focus on the practice, not the performance. This is very similar to the first one, but it focuses on the habit itself. I found a study that talked about children that were starting to play an instrument, and they were asked the question, how long do you intend to play the instrument? They were given 3 choices. One was through the end of the school year, through the end of their school career, if you will, or for their lifetime. And the interesting thing that they found in this study is the students that were committed for life progressed faster with only 20 minutes of weekly practice than the students that said, I only want to play it for this year, but they practiced for 90 minutes a week. Because it showed commitment. They focused on the practice and not on the performance. The students that wanted to only for this school year, they were only in it for this school year and they wanted to get to that performance. They didn't focus on the practice. Productive and successful people practice the things that are important to them on a consistent basis. That's the difference. The best weightlifters are in the gym at the same time every week. The strange thing about top performers is not it's not about the performance, it's about the continual practice. And this is something that, again, that I've been known to really enjoy about my running experience. And I know it's weird to a lot of people, but I actually love the training cycle of running almost as much as the racing. So I love knowing that this morning I have this many miles at this pace. Tomorrow morning this at this pace. And I've actually found that there have been times when I've been more nervous and less excited on race day than I am on some of those hard training days, because I enjoy the practice of it and not just the performance. The focus is on doing the action and not achieving the end goal by a certain date. And I think that's why so many people burn out, particularly this time of the year when you start thinking of setting New Year's resolutions. You know, you go to the gym January through middle of February, you can't hardly find a treadmill. But March, April, May, you find all the treadmills you want, right? They focus on the performance, and then they burn out. We got to enjoy the journey. Something that I heard recently that was incredibly powerful for me that runs alongside this point is I had the privilege of listening to Jeff Evans speak. He is a mountaineering guide that was able to help Eric Weinmeier become the first blind man to reach the summit of Mount Everest. And what stuck out to me that during that talk was this. It took them 2.5 months to reach the summit of Mount Everest. So 2.5 months from the time they got to base camp till they reached the summit. They get to the top, and Eric is blind, and his guide mentions something about the top being at the summit, and Eric looks at him and goes, "The view is really overrated." But what struck me was this. Said, took 2.5 months to climb. They spent 20 minutes at the summit. That's it. Only 20 minutes. So they had to be able to enjoy the journey in getting there. It's not just the summit. And the other thing that was really challenging is that's a lot like life. We have to enjoy the daily grind, if you will. Because truly in our lives, I mean, unless you're different than me, but there's only so many summits that we get to enjoy in life. We wish that everything could be lived at the mountaintop, right? But unfortunately, a lot of it is going up the sides. And sometimes what happens is we get to that summit and then we lose our traction going down the other side again. We lose focus. And that goes so well with what Jeff shared, is the larger percentage of deaths that happen on Mount Everest is actually on the way back down after they've been to the summit. So let's be careful. Let's enjoy the practice and not just shoot for the performance. A powerful quote that was on Eric's website says, "Don't make Mount Everest the greatest thing you ever do." Talking about constantly enjoying the journey. So whatever your goal is that you have this morning, don't make that the greatest thing that you ever do. Enjoy getting there. Make it the daily habits. If you want to be the type of person who accomplishes things on a consistent basis, then give yourself a schedule to follow, not a deadline to race toward. And that brings me to the last point. We have to be consistent. But consistency is more important than perfection. And this is one where I trip up all the time. Because if I can't get it perfect, then I lose hope. It doesn't matter what you're trying to become better at. If you only do the work when you're motivated, then you'll never be consistent be consistent enough to become a professional. So whatever that is, it means that you take time for what matters to you. especially when you don't feel like it. And I'm going to let you in on a little secret here. There are a lot of mornings where I wake up and I don't feel like getting out and pounding the pavement. Just in case you thought that I never felt like that. There are a lot of mornings like that. You achieve success by consistently doing the little things that keep you moving towards accomplishing your larger goals. And these little things eventually become habits. Keep moving forward, a little by day, and you'll gather the momentum you need to achieve your goals. Momentum is based on the idea that an object in motion stays in motion. And this is why it's more effective to do a workout several minutes each day than run an hour or two, 3 days a week. And this is why it's also more effective to read a little every day instead of trying to sit down and just get through that book. Just read a little bit every day if that's your goal. Or practice that instrument 15 minutes a day instead of trying to do it all on a Saturday for an hour or two. When we're consistent with anything that we do, we stay in motion. And when we stay in motion, we gather momentum. Consistent persistence is the anvil that wears out the hammer of fatigue and discouragement. So just be consistent. I want to look at just a couple things that required consistency as well as persistence. It took 26 months to build the Eiffel Tower. It took 4 years for Da Vinci to paint the Mona Lisa. It took Michelangelo 4 years to paint the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel. I don't know if I would have had enough patience for that. It took around 30 years to build the Great Pyramid. It took over 40 years before Beethoven's Für Elise was performed. And it took Noah 100 years to build the ark. Just consistently working on that. You see, I don't think most people understand the power of consistency because we use our time poorly. And then we feel great pressure to maximize what little time we have because we're not consistent. Consistency is more sustainable than speed. Some tips that work for me. Don't start too big. Don't go, like I said, don't start with that, practicing guitar for an hour. When you miss, get back up, but don't let that second miss come. If it's a healthy eating habit that you want to establish and you mess up one day, it's okay. Move on to the next day. Just don't let the second day follow up. Also, measure how you are doing. I'm a strong believer in you can't improve what you don't measure. And this can look several different ways. An example that I have, and again, this is pretty practical, but I started to journal more and to keep a prayer wheel. And for me, I always just thought, well, I can have my devotions and I can pray. But what it's allowed me to do is, how many of you find that you want to maybe have your devotions every day and you think you're doing pretty good? How do you really know until you journal or log it and then you go back? And oftentimes we kind of tend to judge ourselves by what we hope to accomplish, not what we actually did. And so what I found is when I didn't journal, I thought, well, I only skipped a day. Well, it was actually 3, maybe 4 days. Same thing applies with my prayer life. If we keep a written log of who we want to pray for, what we want to pray for, then we can measure it. Another way that we need to do this is don't get so hung up on the daily measure, but what's it look like over a span of time? And that specifically in counting calories, reviewing them at the end of the week maybe. And you have to realize that maybe an individual meal you didn't do so good, but you maintained the right balance or the average speed throughout the week. That's what's really important, is you were consistent in that. Another practical thing that I've done, and again, not everybody is designed the way that maybe I am, but for me this works, and this helps me measure how am I doing. So I've created a habit tracker. Again, this is in Notion, and I hid what my habits are up there so you don't think I'm really crazy. But this allows me to go in there and see daily, okay, how did I do on these activities? How am I really tracking? So again, remember, to begin building better habits, create identity-based habits, focus on the practice, not the performance. Be consistent. And with these, will you join me in doing the work to build good habits so that 5 years from now, you will not be the same, but you will have improved intentionally? Thank you.